Hello, Virginia Church of God of Prophecy. It's Joshua Lynn, your state bishop, and I'm coming you today to share with you a interview that we have that I believe will benefit and bless you. It has been something on my mind and heart to bring you some interviews to meet different people from around our state and throughout the Church of God of Prophecy internationally. As we begin this new year and look into all of the things that we as pastors and leaders confront, I thought it would be a great benefit to introduce you to one of our international offices staff and executive directors to share with you some information I think that will be relevant and beneficial to your ministry, to your churches, and to even your family. And so let me go ahead and welcome and introduce Bishop Paul Holt. He is coming to us this morning from the international offices of the Church of God of Prophecy. Bishop Paul Holt is the executive finance director for the, again, global church. And so, Bishop Holt, it's so good to have you with us. And so tell us a little bit about yourself and about your role there at international offices.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's good to be with you. As far as a little something about myself, I pastored for a number of years before transitioning to the international offices. Came here in about 2007, started in this role in 2010. And my wife and I have enjoyed our years in ministry, and our sons were raised and taken care of by the Church of God of Prophecy. And now we have 6 grandchildren with a 7th on the way. And in my role here, oversee a number of departments, information technology, all retail operations, which includes Fields of the Wood, Heritage Ministries, financial services, our properties and insurance and maintenance, global missions is an important part of that. So there are a number of areas that we touch every day. I tease people that I can either be dealing with a funding issue in India or a toilet issue at the international office. So it's pretty widespread.
Certainly sounds busy. Of course, personally, we know the Holts and their family well and are special to Creasy and I. They were our pastors for a number of years and dear friends, and we honor them greatly for the mentorship they provided in our life. And as well, it provides a great benefit. We trust you and know you're willing to be gracious to this first attempt for an interview here for the Virginia Church of God of Prophecy. So thank you for this first time for us as well. But we again appreciate, know that you stay quite busy. One of the things as a pastor and a leader, as we start the new year, that some have probably already done, some may be in the middle of, some may have just done it, but are kind of trying to determine their value, is that element of budgeting as a local church. And so I thought maybe the first kind of question there is, from your eyes, from the years of pastoring, why is it important, or is it important for a local church to budget? And how do you start one if you're going to do it?
Well, I think it's extremely important, and it's actually a blueprint for our mission and ministry for our local church. It's not just a financial plan, it's a ministry plan. How are we going to fund our vision? So I think it's extremely important. And getting started is as simple as, number one, knowing what your vision is. What is your mission and purpose? And that's not exactly the same from local church to local church. We have inner city churches. We have churches out in the country whose scope of ministry may be different. You know, the ultimate goal is to win souls, but the approach may be different, and how we need to spend our money may be different. So we know our vision, and then we go about putting together, looking at the past and putting together a record of how we have spent our money. Has it been effective? Now, I know we got to keep the lights on. There's some things that are critically important, but what we've spent on ministry, has it been fruitful? If not, do we need to reevaluate how we're investing in the harvest field and then project what we want to do for the next year? So this is a great time to do that, especially if you're on a calendar year budget. If you haven't already done a budget, this is the time to do it.
Certainly. Well, that's I love how you said that. Is, you know, in business, a lot of times the budget defines the scope of business, but we are first, as someone taught me years ago, a spiritual house before a financial or business house. And so I love how you said, starting with that vision. I found it good as a pastor and a leader to we'll talk about this in a moment, but to the committees and those that help oversee it, is first sharing that vision with them, so that before you ask for numbers or discuss numbers, that you have some idea of that. So I love how you brought that out. One of the things that after that, I guess numerically getting into those nuts and bolts of a budget is, I don't want to oversimplify it, but we know there's the income side or the giving side and then the expenditure side. How do you practically advise looking at expectations of things like income or comparing previous year's expenses, some of those fixed expenses, like you said, light bills, and any practical elements of, do you use averages? Do you use exact numbers? Do you project forecasting hopes? Or how do you recommend kind of that balance of all of that in the practical side?
And there's a number of ways to do that. And if you read books on budgeting, they'll bring out various approaches as to how to budget, how to get these numbers together. I tend to be more on the conservative side. And in recent years, they promote finishing with a balanced budget or starting with a balanced budget where your projected revenues equal your projected expenses. I've kind of changed my mindset on that over the past few years and read a lot where the goal would be better served as a surplus budget, that being our goal rather than just starting with 2 zeros. But we want to end with something left over, so we're prepared if we get a surprise during the year to deal with that particular surprise. In my approach, I think you have to look at what history has been, especially when you're thinking about insurance, utilities, what you paid to be in your building. Those things remain pretty much steady from year to year, so you can count on those. There may be some increase in utilities, but you factor in whether it's 5%, 10%, or what trends you've seen from year to year. If you've seen an increase from year to year, then factor that type of percentage in. In today's economy, a lot of things are unstable. They seem to change quickly. So, account for that. But when it comes to the ministry part, I think there has to be some dreaming in a budget. We have to look beyond the resources that are before us. I always said to churches I've pastored, we have to balance our physical FISCAL responsibility with our spiritual responsibility, because there's still that spiritual dynamic of faith. I'm not talking about being reckless, but we have to be willing to allow God to speak to our hearts as to what he wants to accomplish in us. And if what has traditionally been our revenue stream we know would fall short, then we have to project ways to raise that money to achieve what God has put before us. And I think funding follows vision. If we're truly following a God-given vision, then God is going to reward that faith. So there is a balancing act there. And I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Certainly. No, that is great. I think, as you said, even in that forecasting, the spiritual that may override the physical elements of it, in the sense numerically, is, even if it is that case and you're short whatever amount, it then gives you clarity of what you have to do that year, whether that's a fundraising endeavor, whether that's recasting vision in a way that would compel people to give to that vision. You now know the need, instead of blindly just hoping that it happens. And it puts you in, if I can say, control of communicating that instead of blindly having faith. Certainly faith is a part of it, but as leaders, we have to take steps of faith and put it into action. And if you know you're short, whatever figure that is for the vision you feel, gives you something to communicate. It gives you something to let people be a part of and know why they're a part of it. So I love that. And that kind of ties into this kind of another question that I faced from pastors in a variety of roles is, often when we talk about budgets in churches, we think about the church with surplus tithes, as we would call them, the excess of paying tithes to the pastor, the base pay. And certainly that's important, but we think of it sometimes, sadly, as budgeting is for those that have the money, how they're going to spend money. We got all this money, what do we do with it? But talk about the importance, or again, I guess I should lead with, is it important, and should a small church that doesn't have that situation, they're at $1,500 a month in tithes, and most of that is going to pastors and to the pastor, and they just have general expense income, offerings coming in. Should they do it, and why is it important if so?
I think every church should do it regardless of size. I don't think budgeting is just a large church or a church with tremendous resources. I don't think it's just for them. I think it's for everybody. If you're accounting for how you're going to spend your $100 or how you're going to spend your $1,000, you're still projecting a plan. So it's all about a plan. And I think how we steward that little bit that we have can be done with greater excellence when we have a plan and the budget is that plan. So it is not exclusive to resource filled churches. It's something for everybody, not just in church, but in our families, whether someone has a small income or a large income, budgeting plays a role. And I promoted the goal of being a surplus budget a few minutes ago, but in a small church or in a situation like that, you're probably going to be looking at a deficit budget when you first put it together. But again, as we said a little bit ago, that gives you some idea as to how to plan. If we're going to minister, for example, if we're going to minister to children, then let's figure out how to get the resources into our church to do that. Let's make that part of our vision important, and that should be done small or large. You've got to have a plan.
Great. Well, I think practically one of the things that I have said or attempted to do as pastor is whether you do a vision Sunday or whatever phrase you do, is if you can communicate the vision and then attach certainly the need in there is important. And then even when you're able to do some of those ministry elements, so you mentioned children as an example, you can communicate to your congregation and those around you that have given first an appreciation, but letting them know their giving has been a part of this ministry vision. They're not separated. And some of our senior generations, they certainly were motivated to give for power bills or utilities and insurance, but and we may not get into the depths here, but some of the I'll say middle age and younger, they tend to give more consistently and faithfully when we communicate the ministry pieces, not the
Sure.
fixed needs. And so even in what you just said, they are able to communicate, here's our ministry vision, here's the importance kind of giving to that. And I'll pause a second. If you're joining us and have a question, we may not answer it live here, but if you have a question, feel free to drop that in the comments and we'll make sure to get you an answer to that question. We'd love to entertain those questions, and myself or Bishop Holt will try to answer those. One of the things you mentioned in the budget or loosely alluded to those was things like church insurance. And I think as we reevaluate budget for the year, that this is also a time we sometimes look at that insurance total and are frustrated with the amount of cost. But how frequently should we reassess insurance? What kind of review do you recommend? And what are things, I'll kind of make this a package. What are some things that should be included in that policy for a local church?
But unfortunately, some churches never reassess their insurance at all. They've got it. They know Joe, who is the broker, and they're comfortable with him, and they've had that same coverage for years. Always had a different approach. I think it's important to do periodic reviews of your insurance coverage. As a pastor, I did a review every 2 years. It was just my practice. I'm not saying that's the textbook way to do it, but that is the way that I approached it for a couple of reasons. Number one, to make sure that our coverage was still sufficient. Had our building value increased? Was our liability coverage where it needed to be? Are the standards still the same, or had things increased? Did we have the appropriate coverage across the board that we needed for the size church that we were? And looking at the premium, is our premium competitive? So I actually would bid out the insurance every 2 years, and ended up changing our insurance company every 2 years and saved money every time. So we would save a significant amount of money. And there was a couple of times I got assurances from our carrier that they would guarantee our rate for 2 years. So I was set for 2 years before we did a reevaluation. And that is important. Your broker, your carrier can get comfortable with you, and you get comfortable with them. And somewhere you may have missed the market, and it's time to revisit and make sure that you're being good stewards with the money that you are investing in your insurance. It's all you're mitigating risk, and that's what we do with our insurance. Some areas of coverage to look at, and this varies again by church size, but a couple are very important. Your commercial property insurance, you need to have the property covered. You need to have general liability. I think every church needs to have that, especially if they own the building or they're trying to own the building. Workman's comp fits in some situations. If you have a staff, you need your workman's compensation insurance. Your auto insurance, if you have a vehicle, you need to have that covered. Directors and officers insurance is also an important coverage nowadays, especially with so many of our local churches seeking incorporation. You want to make sure you have the appropriate coverage. And two that are sometimes missed, if a church goes to a carrier that is not really, that doesn't really specialize in churches, sometimes these two are missed. But religious counseling services, liability, that's important. And sexual conduct liability insurance, also important. So those are some areas to look at to make sure you're covered and that you have adequate coverage in each of those areas.
Certainly. Well, as most in the North American context, certainly here in Virginia, with the inflation we have had in the last 18 months and the cost of building has shot up, certainly a good time for people to reevaluate that. I have seen cases where churches were hundreds of thousands of dollars short of what it would take to rebuild their property, and that was before the recent change. And I had a pastor years ago tell me that they couldn't afford the increase. And I certainly understand the budgeting element of that annually, but the alternative is if something destroyed their property, they would have literally been in something about 50 to 60% of just the size, forget any of the other issues. And so I would say, and then just interjecting my opinion, you can't afford not to have appropriate coverages, whether that's back again to going in a deficit situation in your budget and you have to figure it out or whatever. And I'll echo those extra coverages. Again, a lot of our churches don't have carriers that do even a church policy for the directors, officers, and those counseling and sexual misconduct, those elements. So again, certainly, hopefully you'll never have to use them, but I echo Bishop Holt's statement there for certain. One of the other things in the stewardship element of the churches is, again, different churches have different sizes, so this makeup may look different, but is the role of finance committees. I don't know, our polity manual covers that. It's technically a recommendation and requirement really of the assembly. So tell us what that finance committee looks like, its role, and just talk about that for a moment.
I think the look of the finance committee can vary from local church to local church, from state and region to state and region. It's going to reflect the ministry and the makeup, the composition, and the size even of that church. I think it's important to have somebody. Our ministry policy manual really outlines well the role of the Finance and Stewardship Committee, setting the budget in cooperation with the pastor, the treasurer, the local church conference, things like making sure monies that should be paid to the state or to the international offices, that those things are being taken care of, that the giving is flowing, that the funding for ministry is flowing. But even a small church can have a finance committee because there's really not a particular size. It doesn't have to be 8 people, 10 people, 12 people, but put together a group that works. I think it opens the door for people to make accusations when the pastor is carrying that entire load. It leaves the pastor vulnerable. And in the North American context, especially the United States, some will understand this. I've always said, don't be a Lone Ranger. But if you think about it, even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. He had somebody. So sure. Let's make sure we have others surrounding us. In the multitude of counselors, there is safety. So identify 2 or 3 people, men or women, that can help you, pastor, carry that load, because it is better for you. It's better for the local church. It models accountability, integrity, transparency when we're working together and we're open with our local churches in that manner.
Certainly, I agree. And all of those are coming under the membership through the conference, if you will, of the local church. And so the church is a part of that, and they have delegated whatever defined. I know in churches I have been a part of, those roles were there, but the local church had delegated a a 500 or 1,000 or some figure. I've seen it in larger churches. We've had higher, but even small churches. That way, there wasn't a having to do so many maybe called conferences to deal with a $500 expenditure that has came up, but you've delegated that and trusted that, and they respond. So it helps in the operation of just the day to day of those things. And so I think it's important in that accountability, integrity, something that I know small churches sometimes deal with, and we may not have discussed this, but we have I think it's a part of the polity recommendation that we try to not have a spouse of a pastor being the treasurer. Can you talk about the importance of that and kind of, again, our policy on that and why we say that?
I believe that particular piece of business was passed in the 2014 assembly. And it was really to protect the pastor and family. And the policy is that a family member of the pastoral family should not serve as treasurer, but in extreme cases where there's just no choice, they can get approval from their state or regional bishop to do that. But I think a lot of the state offices require some accountability in that situation just to cover everyone and protect everyone. And it's really to protect the pastor, because one thing that can get people frustrated is anything that regards money for whatever reason, that it can be a hot spot. And so it just protects everyone when there's good accountability and flow from the pastor to the treasurer to the finance committee, local church conference, who are all working together to achieve the same objective, and that's the mission and purpose of the church. So that's the reason that was put in place. There was a time, I understand, prior to this ever being put in place, there was a period in my pastorate where my wife was the treasurer. And I always felt very awkward with the arrangement and was glad when we could shift away from that. It was a blessing that she could, but it was an even greater blessing when we could make it where she did not have to. And that was exciting.
Certainly. Well, that's, and it may require a local church find someone that they could train even. And I know we here in our office, and I'm sure your office would do our part to try to help someone get up to speed, because it does create accountability and it's a great value. Let me, I want to not take too long of your time or those that are joining us. What are some other areas that you may, as a pastor and knowing the things you have faced, some other areas that you would think would be important in this broad range of finance and stewardship for a pastor or a local church to be aware of in these business elements?
Well, I think what I learned as a pastor is the pastor needs to be connected to what's going on financially in the local church. I know some pastors feel they're not gifted in administration, so they just put that off on someone else and they really don't think about it or worry about it. You don't have to be gifted in administration to read the checking statement every month, just to take a look at it and see the flow of funds, to be aware of the revenue flow in the church and the expenses as they go out. I always thought it was important to be aware. And if I was going to sit with a finance committee or sit with a local church and discuss finance matters, I need to be educated on the financial matters of the local church. So I think for pastors, it's an awareness. And then for every level of the local church, it's good communication between every level. There should be no secrets. The pastor's not holding a secret for this, or the finance committee's not holding a secret for that. Pastor should be communicating with the finance committee with the local church through the local church conference, so that everybody is on the same page all the time.
Certainly. I love that. I have found as a pastor that our giving would increase the more information, the more clarity we gave of what was happening. I had some finance committees that were entrusted with large amounts of money, but when we began to communicate to the membership, last church I was at, we did a night of vision. And so we shared insane amount of information. And we had people that had never knew we participated in those ministries, certainly didn't know our expenses with that. And our giving actually went up. And so I whether it's small churches with small budgets or large budgets, I have found the more communication you have with those that attend your church and less secrecy, whether intentional or unintentional, it actually increases your giving, generally speaking, because they trust you. They know what you're doing, whether it's they appreciate the ministry you're doing, or they just now understand that things like insurance are as expensive as they are today. So I echo that with you as well. Let me kind of ask you one last question. I know one of our administrative responsibilities as pastors and even local treasurers is some of the reporting that we do to international offices. There's also the report the treasurer provides the state of Virginia, but that sounds very unministry related, filling out reports. That sounds business. Why is that important? What's some comments you maybe could make about that?
Okay. Well, for me, reporting is all about accountability. As a minister, I'm required to report to the state that I'm residing in, which I do, and to the international offices. And that is an accountability factor for me. So I think the local church report, for example, the treasurer's report to the international offices, that's an instrument of information, accountability, and connection. And it is helping us to fund the work all around the world. I know there is a mindset that money flows into the international offices and never leaves. But I think it was last year, 42% of all the money that came from the United States into the international offices went directly back out to the field. I'm very pleased with that number. It exceeds salary and compensation. In addition, many of our departments, leadership development, for example, who is funded by the reports and the money that comes in, they're touching the field every day all over the world, and they're traveling, they're teaching, they're providing resources, and our people are a part of that. So again, accountability, information, connection, and a shared funding, a shared carrying of the work around the world. I think it's very, very New Testament, and I think there's a spiritual component to it.
Certainly, that's great. How in the practical side of that does maybe a treasurer, a new treasurer, maybe it's one of these that have just assumed responsibility or didn't know they were supposed to report? How do they physically do it? I know there's a paper version and basically a digital, and so can you kind of, and I know that some of those are maybe in depth, but just generally give them an idea how to connect with those two.
Certainly, we have the paper version, and you can get a copy of the report book or a report book from the Financial Services Department, or let me know and I'll see that you get one. You can also report online. That's our preferred way. Some of our churches, our treasurers, some write legible, some do not. So the written report can be a little difficult to interpret, but online is much easier to understand and to read. And you can actually submit any funds that you need to submit online as well. So it's a great way to do it. It's on the COGOP website. Go to cogop.org and just look for that connection, and you can report online.
Great. We'll try to also share maybe in the comments a direct link to that for those that maybe didn't know they were able to provide that. That's a service that makes it a little easier. And I said last question, I guess, but in the side of this is what are some of the other resources that might be available to our local church from particularly the overall all of those areas you mentioned you covered, the financial offices and those areas of oversight you have that might be a benefit, whether it's free or maybe even just items that they could purchase that would help a local church or a local pastor?
Okay. Well, all of our departments in finance administration, which is the service and support departments, are available to assist. Global Missions will assist you in getting your funds to where you want those funds to go. And 100% of the funds that are given in missions goes to what it's been given for. Our ITS department, information technology, you have software questions or how can we do this? How can we do that with media? They're open to taking those questions, all free, and assisting in any way they can. Of course, Heritage Ministries, Fields of the Wood, you're planning a trip, you want to go have a volunteer work day or whatever, they're available to help. As far as financial services, tax questions, financial questions, they handle many of those. I handle many of those. We want to give you the resources that we can. We just passed around a free tax resource for pastors and churches that was provided to us by ECFA. Hopefully everyone will get that. If you do not, let me know. I'll be happy to get that to you. That's free of charge. We have our 403B retirement program for church staff that you're able to participate in, and we would love to have you get more information about that. And we're available to assist you with training and whatever we can, any aspect of stewardship, budgeting, personal stewardship, church stewardship, whatever it may be. We are happy to help. So if you just wonder, do they do that? Just contact me and ask, and we will do our best to find a solution for you. We're here to help our local churches. We serve you, we work for you, and we want to do all that we can for you.
Thank you for that. I know that was a lot of great information. I think if all of you that are watching just simply grab hold of, if I have a question in any of those areas, reach out. The international website, again, is cogop.org. There are by departments a list. If you have difficulty finding the right person to contact, there is a phone number there, or again, you can reach out to us here at State Office and we will connect you. You can drop me an email and I can even forward it to the appropriate person at international offices to help connect you. The tax information that Bishop Holt just mentioned is actually now on our website, vacogop.org, under our resource tab. So we provided that when he forwarded it to us. We posted it so it would be accessible to you in those ways. Again, echoing his statement, we're here to serve you in this office, as well as I know our international offices are as well. Bishop Holt is not a stranger to Virginia. He spoke in previous state conventions, and so I know many of you know him, but he is willing to visit your church. I actually know he has an upcoming revival this spring in one of our churches. So his ministry is a little broader than the financial services area, even though stewardship is a personal passion of his. So he is available to come and speak in your church, whether it's an element of stewardship that you would like preached. I know as a pastor, especially younger pastors, maybe get a few years on you, you feel a little more comfortable in that area, or maybe you're afraid they're tired of hearing your version of stewardship. Wherever it is, Bishop Holt is willing to come speak on stewardship or to just minister to your congregation. And so you can reach out to him. Again, he's giving you those ways to do that. He'd be willing to. And I would be a poor friend and a poor interviewer to not mention that he and his wife recently wrote and released a book at the last assembly. And so I'll let you tell us what that book is and how we could connect to it. And then I'll let you go for the day.
Well, that's kind of you. You know, commercials are not my best thing, as we have discussed before, but we've written a book entitled The Goldfish Principle. And it's a book of stewardship lessons that we've learned through our ministry, especially in our early ministry when there were very few resources in our household, and how God taught us and provided for us and moved us away from a place of debt to a place of freedom. And my wife wrote most of it, so I give her most of the credit. Our story, and I wrote a little, but she wrote the bulk. And we just hope it's a blessing to somebody.
Well, certainly, and that is Sister Barbara Holt. She is great at sharing those things. So they come as a package usually when they are able to visit most occasions here. So you would get to meet her, and but this is a great resource for you. And if you caught that, it's not just the pastoral element as a leader, but your personal finances as a pastor. That's the perspective that he's mentioning, sharing. So again, thank you so much, Bishop Holt, for your time today. I hope this is a benefit to our pastors, to our leaders, and just even to our members around the state to kind of know a little bit of who is in our international offices. I think sometimes we forget we are global and the things that are happening. And so thank you. And I think your staff, I know most of them, and they do an excellent job. They're passionate about what they do. They love their church. They love our local churches. And so thank you all. I know that they may not watch this, but certainly thank them from the great state of Virginia that we appreciate the work you guys are doing. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Privilege.
God bless you. Thank you for joining us on this. I hope it's been a benefit. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to drop those in the comments below or reach out to us. We hope you have a blessed day. God bless you from the state offices in Virginia.